where the English language, frankly, comes in. I've gone to Central Asia, for example. In Central Asia, what happened was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet system of teaching collapsed in Central Asia as well. You had a very Russified, Sovietized system of teaching, and I always look at the schools. Because I always believe that if you look at the schools, look at the curricula, look at the kind of education you're imparting, look at the kind of people who are coming out, you can track the way society is going to develop in 5, 10, 15 years. The schools are extremely important. And if you look at the schools in England, if you look at schools in India, you'll have a fair idea of the development of English society or Indian society 5 or 10 or 15 years later. But there was a complete collapse of Russian education. Now what happened? What filled the vacuum? I would have liked to see, for example, Indian teachers, Filipino teachers, English teachers coming in and setting up English language classes, English language courses, because the beauty of the English language is it opens your mind, it opens yourself to an access to an incredible amount of knowledge. Much more than most other languages of the world. In fact, I would like to say almost any other language in the world. So that very broad 360-degree, opening of the mind. I mean, if the English, let's say out of 360 degrees, the English language is about 359 degrees. And any other language would be, I would say, 180 degrees would be the maximum. So this is way far and above every other language. And it's because of the people who speak English across the world, including, I'm happy to say, a lot of people in India who, you may not believe it, but we all claim to know and speak English very well. But anyway, so that, that would have been a very helpful kind of thing. So that, whether it's in Central Asia, whether it's anywhere in the world, you find people who know English very well. I mean, there are, of course, exceptions, but people who know English very well, overall, they have access to a different kind of information, and that access gives them a much more modern mindset. Now, we used that learning, frankly, in India, in the year, I would say, when was it, 2003, under my advice, again, Vice Chancellor. Every religious school in India was given a free internet connection. The then Minister for Education, a person called Dr. Joshi, he somehow thought it was a good idea, and he persuaded the Finance Ministry to give out the money. So every religious school was offered free internet. Whether it's a Muslim religious school or a Hindu religious school or whatever religious school, it was given a free internet. The reasoning was very simple. The reasoning was, in a religious school, you're taught a very narrow spectrum of knowledge. You're taught to view things in an extremely narrow way. But if you have access to the internet, you can, technically you're able to go beyond that and get access to different types of knowledge, different types of viewpoints, and that could help, in a sense, moderate that very laser-like vision that you're being taught in that religious school. So as of now in India, about 80% of our religious schools, both Hindu and Muslim, have got this free internet service. We also introduced free classes in English, in some other culture, society, etc. And these classes are by teachers who are by the state. The state will pay for the internet, the state will pay for the English teachers, the state will pay for all these other kind of teachers. And about 30% of these religious schools have taken advantage of that, and they've got English teachers and other kind of teachers. I wish it becomes 100%, frankly. But we do believe that 70% of students who are where the internet is there definitely have a mindset that is much more moderate than that 30% where the internet is not there. We definitely believe that that percentage of people who have studied different subjects, apart from religious subjects, we believe that these people are much more moderate, much better able to handle situations in the world. Because frankly, a purely religious education, the difficulty about that is, it's very difficult to fit into any kind of an occupation in a modern globalized society. Whether it's whether it's knowledge industry or whether it's any other kind of industry, it's very difficult to fit into that. Whereas if you broaden your education, it's much easier to fit into that. So it became a very important way of frankly creating a way of moderation in the world. Which is why, some of us have seen the advantage of English. And which is why when we went back and we saw this whole concept of the Anglosphere. Now, I mean, Winston Churchill was absolutely a great human being. I know he's a great hero in this part of the world. In our part of the world, we are seeing him slightly differently because he was completely opposed to Indian independence. He was very clear that the Indians would make a complete mess of things if we ever became free. And I must confess that he's absolutely right. We are making a complete mess of things, you know. But we'd rather do that than be, part of some other system again. But the reality of the situation was, his idea of the Anglosphere was based on race, on genetics. Now, Churchill was very helpful in defeating the Nazi party. So it's a bit, if I may say so, disappointing for some of us to see the Nazi theories of eugenics and race, etc., come into some of his political and cultural constructs. My own view, frankly, is that the English language is beyond race, it's beyond nationality, it's beyond country. It's an invention that's grown to such an extent that it's way beyond the island where it was created, which is this particular part of the world. The English language in that sense, so a 21st century Anglosphere will emphasize not the blood of the body, but the blood of the mind. People who think, in a sense, who believe in a modern society, who believe in people working together, who believe that we're all children of the same Almighty God, that kind, the blood of the mind, so to speak, becomes more important than the blood of the body. And this should be a 21st century Anglosphere. Of course, the United Kingdom will be the central part of that Anglosphere because you invented the language. You did a lot of nasty things also, like inventing cricket and wasting a lot of time. Too many of us watch these cricket matches on television, and the little work that we normally do, even that we don't do whenever a good cricket match is going on, but I'll forgive you for that, Vice Chancellor. But the reality of the situation is therefore that it's very important that we think in that kind of an overall context. And we think of that kind of an overall partnership. Because that is the only way to bring forward a situation in which we can prevail against this kind of, if I may say so, in my country definitely, there's a race between people who are medievalist. I wouldn't call them traditionalists. I'm a traditionalist. My wife is a traditionalist. We are proud of our tradition. But we are in the 21st century. We can't go back to the 19th or the 17th or the 14th or the 15th or the 10th. We can't. It's not possible. And that's why, again, one more of a, as I said, I'm forced to come up with theories every 3 or 4 years to justify my status as a professor. So one of my slightly outlandish theories of that. The Hindu right has got something called Hindutva, which is every Indian should conform to what they call as Hindu values. Now, remarkably, many of the Hindu values of the hard right are very similar to the Muslim values of the hard Islamic thing. They both dislike Valentine's Day, they both dislike alcohol, they both dislike any dress that's not completely whatever it is. So personally I find the Hindu right and the Muslim right very similar in their social attitudes. But the point I'm trying to make is frankly that Hindutva, what I said was, an Indian, the cultural DNA is a compound of 3 very powerful cultural streams. The first is the Vedic stream, our own. The second is the Mughal stream. The Mughals came over into India and they took over the country about 1,000 and odd years ago, and they ruled this country for about 700 years until the Europeans came. And the third stream is the Western stream. So we have these very powerful DNA strands in our cultural matrix. The Western, the Mughal, and the Vedic. All 3 have fused in us, and we are now a compound of these 3 strands. You can't therefore hate the West, because if you're hating the West, you're hating a part of yourself. You can't hate the Mughal period, because if you hate the Mughal period, you're hating a part of yourself. And you can't, of course, hate the Vedic period, even if you're Muslim, even if you're Christian, because if you hate that, you're hating a part of yourself. Because we are a compound culture. And I think everybody in the world today has, in a sense, because of mass media, because of internet, because of the spread of knowledge, because of the spread of travel, all of us have become, in a sense, fusion cultures. We have all, in a sense, imbibed different elements of different cultures into us. And I think that's an extremely healthy thing, and that's a very healthy thing for us. So the point I'm trying to make is that kind of a moderate culture, that kind of a moderate culture is well served by universalization of knowledge of the English language. Fortunately today, there's no state in India which has not made English compulsory. 20 years ago, 3/4 of states in India, English was not compulsory. 25, 30 years ago, some states banned English, but today, every state has made English compulsory. And the consequence is that you're going to have 1 billion people speaking English about a generation from now, which I think is going to be more English-speaking people than the rest of the world put together. So I think, Vice Chancellor, we would like to say that we certainly should play a very, very important part in that kind of an Anglosphere. So this is basically the concept that we worked out. That let's have a 21st century Anglosphere. Let's have an Anglosphere based on shared values and shared cultures. And I'd like to say this because in the Western world, frankly, there are certain way of going in a straight line. Now you assume, for example, that if you have a Western, if you are moving towards a Western system of democracy, you're moving towards liberal values. If you look at the Middle East, look at the example of Kuwait. The Kuwait royal family, the Al Sabahs, are an extremely moderate and very progressive royal family. Kuwait, 50 years ago, they had a Kuwaiti constitution. They've got elections in which women can stand for election, in which women can vote. A Kuwaiti lady can go around in any dress that a Kuwaiti lady likes. I mean, we can go around the same dress that people wear in supermarkets in England, and no one's going to stop them. It's a very moderate country that way. But you don't have alcohol in Kuwait, for example. A lot of there's a kind of a creeping, if I may say so, intolerance of certain lifestyles coming into Kuwait. And that creeping intolerance is not coming because of the royal family or because of autocracy. It's coming because of the democratic legislative assembly of Kuwait that's been elected in free election. If you look at Dubai, in a certain sense, our campus is in Dubai because it's the freest part of the Middle East. We set up our campus there because relative to the rest of the Middle East, it's the freest part of the Middle East. It's never had an election for a very long time. It's ruled by one man, the Sheikh. So, I mean, it's very different from being a democracy. But in many respects, people in Dubai are much freer than they are in Kuwait, which is much more democratic. You look at Egypt now, for example. Now, what happens? What happens in a situation? You look at the Arab Spring. What's happened in the Arab Spring? Large masses of people have come together, of different groups, different types. But what happens is, once they come together and they topple an existing thing, then what happens is, a small group of people who are organized, who are ruthless, who are very centralized, they grab control of the entire movement. You're seeing that in 1917, the Russian Revolution. You had a revolution in which, the Tsar autocracy was you had Kerensky, you had a fairly good government there, and then the Bolsheviks under Lenin took control. You saw that in Iran. In Iran, the anti-Shah movement was led largely by liberals, almost entirely by liberals. The people in the streets were liberal. Very little, I mean, you had, Khomeini somewhere in Paris, muttering into his tape recorder. But the fact of the matter is, it was liberals. But who took command? Because the Khomeinists were well organized, they were strong, they were a small group, they took command of the thing. So our worry is that this Arab Spring, which has resulted in a lot of liberals and others coming together, maybe control may go to a small centralized group of people which are, in a sense, Wahhabi in their basic orientation. And that would be a complete travesty of the desires of the Arab people. Frankly, I am much happier in 2013 to see the kind of fission that's going on in Egypt against President Morsi's attempts to gain more authority for himself than I was in 2011. I was a little worried about 2011, and I wrote pretty early on that I'm very nervous the Arab Spring may turn into a Wahhabi winter. It could still become that, but I'm very happy to see that the liberals and others are fighting back in Tunisia, in Egypt, etc. Because quite frankly, I believe in a multi-religious state. And I do believe that if a man wants to drink alcohol, he or she should be allowed to drink alcohol, wants to wear a particular dress, he or she should be allowed to wear a particular dress, and generally have a lifestyle in which one's own rights are there. For a simple reason, that even if you go into the Holy Quran, the day of judgment is after you pass from this into a different thing. And the day of judgment, the only force that can judge you is the Almighty. Now what we see today under Wahhabism is, we have got multiple people passing judgment on you. Something that should be done only on the day of judgment is done every day by multiple people. You wear a different kind of dress, day of judgment. You wear something else, judgment. You eat pork, different. See, the fact of the matter is the Almighty looks at all the good things you've done, looks at some of the stupid things you've done, maybe alcohol is one of them or whatever it is, and then takes a decision and decides where you have to go. But that decision is exclusively the decision of the Almighty. It cannot be the decision of human beings on earth, whether in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or India or elsewhere. It's got to be a decision of the Almighty. So which is why I believe it's a perversion of a very great faith to talk about a day of judgment before the day of judgment, if you know what I mean. And I'd like to say very clearly that my mother converted. Although I claim to be Buddhist, I've studied a lot of Islamic texts. I have immense respect for the religion. I believe it's a religion of moderation, of peace, and a wonderful religion. And I honestly do believe that, frankly, it has got to be rescued from this kind of setup that's coming. And part of the rescue package will involve a heavy dose of English language education in the Arab countries. Part of the antidote, I would say, would be a very heavy dose of English language education in the Arab countries. So I've been going on and on, I can go on and on indefinitely about South America, about Russia, about other parts of the world. But I think you get the general picture. You get the general idea. So I'd like to stop at this point.
Take questions. I thought I'd just ask one of myself, if I may. I've just read a very good book by Steven Pinker called The Better Angels of Our Nature. Do you know this book?
Okay.
Well, Pinker has written this book and he's looked at rates of violence in the world over the last 1,000 years, and the world gets a safer and safer place every year that passes. Despite all your apocalyptical stories, the world is actually becoming less violent and more law-abiding. It says one very interesting cause of that is novel reading. If you read novels, you're forced to put yourself into the minds of other people and understand other people's positions in society, and it makes you more empathic with them. And he thinks the English language has helped spread the novel. Is that an argument you would agree with?
You know, in fact, by chance I'll go a little further, and I'll talk about cable television. You know, in India, we had a pretty nasty view of Western people. Not just the English, but Western people in general. Various unmentionable things I'm not going to talk about here. And that view started changing in the 1980s. It didn't change in the 1980s because the Vice Chancellor started making a lot of visits to India. It changed because of cable television. You know, we could see these situation comedies. We could see Western people in their homes. We could see them fight with each other, argue with each other, look silly on television every day of our lives. And suddenly the anger factor, the fear factor diminished considerably. So that today I think if you come to India, I don't think you're going to find too many people who are in any way hostile to you because you're a Westerner. I think quite the reverse, so to speak. So cable television was extremely helpful in telling us that, the Western world is as clumsy, as idiotic, as crazy, at least in situation comedies, as we are. So in that sense, it was very, very helpful. So I would say yes, novels, that kind of soft kind of thing, movies, novels, the cable television, it's had an amazing impact.
Professor, I haven't heard so much good sense in a short space of time for a long time. The subject of narrative empathy as a lecturer in English language and literature is one that is very close to my heart. I'm also the child of an English mother and an Indian father, and therefore I find that I am a border crosser in these interesting times that we're living in, and teaching at the University of Buckingham is wonderful because we have many, well, I think we encourage many border crossers in our graduates. What I'm wondering is whether, as a person who does not belong or choose to belong to many discrete groups in my life, and I find that a source of a very positive thing, I'm wondering whether these groups that you're talking about, it strikes me that they are full of people who wish to be one discrete thing. And I'm wondering whether you would agree, perhaps with the perspective that those people are in fact afraid of multiplicity, the multiplicity that I find a huge benefit, not just in my teaching, but also in my life in general. Would you go along with that?
I'd go along with that quite a bit. And in fact,
And perhaps what are they afraid of?
Absolutely. I think I fully agree with you, and I think that's one of the main problems that we have with the European Union, for example. Because we believe that it's a bit too Germanic, the European Union. The basic principles are very much principles of race, ethnicity, etc. Now, I've argued before people, European officials, and I'm afraid I've thought Japanese officials are difficult to deal with, but I think they're nothing compared to European Union officials. They're much more sticky than the Japanese. That look, you have somebody from Tamil Nadu who's a software engineer. You have somebody from Andhra Pradesh who's a financial analyst. He's way better for a particular country than somebody, let's say, an Albanian who's coming from a mafia gang, or somebody in Romania who's come from a very dodgy background. So just because he's Romanian or Albanian doesn't make him a better prospect for migration than somebody from Andhra Pradesh or Tamil Nadu. You know, you'll have much better, wealth and much better social stability if you look at these inherent qualities rather than merely skin color and race. So European Union, from our point of view, is too heavily based on ethnicity, on European ethnicity, and is not based on, as I said, the blood of the mind. So I'm glad this young lady is here, and I fully agree with that. And therefore, I certainly, I think, I certainly feel the European project needs to be revitalized for a simple reason that today the European Union is making itself a closed shop. It's barring migration from Asia. It's barring entry of Asian goods. At the same time, it depends on Asia for its economic well-being, for its economic progress, etc. A time is going to come when Asians are going to start thinking like Europeans. So why do we want these people? Let's block them. Let's block their products. Let's stop buying German cars. Let's stop buying French, whatever, perfume or whatever you call it. So I think frankly, I do hope that don't ever feel that if you're in a minority, it's a pity, but I don't think you're in a minority anymore. I think you're becoming part of a majority.
Yes, sir. I'm not an academic, but I'm straight onto your wavelength. One of the visiting lecturers that we had a few years ago was Majid Nawaz. And you not, I'm glad. He's now chairman, he was founder of the Quilliam Foundation. Strictly not, I'm very pleased about that. I was one of the campaigners who helped to get him out of one of the barracks prisons in Egypt. And during the course of that campaign, his mother said to me on one occasion, "Why do you go to all this trouble for people you don't know?" And that helped to build a bridge on shared values, the firmest foundation on which the future of the world can be built. Do you feel that organisations like the Quilliam Foundation, who stand for religious liberty, democracy and human rights, can also play a significant part in bringing about this kind of world that you would like to see?
Absolutely. I'd like to say that if you go back to the Wall Street Journal long back, I wrote a piece there about 10 years ago called The New Appeasement. And what I said in that, frankly, was that people say that, all right, we are like this, we have these freedoms, these are natural to us. In fact, today I will comment that, look, what you're talking about relates to us, but it doesn't relate to the Arab world. No, that's not true, because freedom relates to everybody. And I'd like to go back to the Hitler, for example, when I think, was it Pastor Bonhoeffer or somebody who said that, when they came for the workers, I didn't bother because I was not a worker. When they came for the Jews, I didn't bother because I was not a Jew. And finally, they came for me. And there was no one to stand for me because, everybody had gone. So, one day, they could come for us. So I'm delighted. And so that struggle is your struggle. Absolutely. I think all of us should feel that way. So what I'd like to see is less tolerance of societies that are discriminating against religious groups. For example, one thing that is really worrying me a lot, as somebody who's studying geopolitics, who's studying this thing, is that, I'm very much a friend of Israel. In 2003, I started the first India-Israel-US trilateral dialogue. At that point in time, many people in the government were not very happy about that, but they said that a lot of material is there that Hindus, Christians and Jews are coming together, and today you'll find a lot of these conspiracy theories of Hindus, Christians and Jews, which is absolutely absurd. But the fact of the matter is, in 1982, Israel made a huge mistake in getting involved in the Lebanese civil war. It got involved on the side of some thugs, called the Gemayels, Maronite thugs, and against the Shia, and many Shia were butchered. What happened was that Israel is now the only country where you've got Shia terrorism. The Shia terrorists are attacking only one country in the world, and that's Israel. Wahhabi terrorists attack everybody. UK, India, France, whatever. They are completely non-discriminatory. There's absolutely, they don't have any, discriminatory in that sense. I mean, but the Shia only attack Israel. My worry, frankly, is that today what's happening, because this focus on Iran, the West is joining the crusade, in my view, a very ill-advised crusade of Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia against Shia people and Shia Islam. In my view, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are going on a crusade against Shia Islam. Now, the Americans are very, very solicitous about Sunni interests in Iraq, that the Sunni should be given oil revenue even though there are no oil wells in Sunni areas. They're not solicitous about the Shia areas in Saudi Arabia. Almost most of the oil in Saudi Arabia is in Shia areas, and the Shia are treated very shabbily in Saudi Arabia. But I haven't heard a single American official talk about that. I haven't heard anybody very much talk about Bahrain, where you've got a Shia majority, but everybody's talking about an Alawite group ruling Sunni majority in Syria. There seems to be a coming together, unfortunately, of the West in this anti-Shia crusade of Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. And my worry is that the West is now going to be the target of Shia terrorism. It is only Israel now, but it's going to be the entire West tomorrow because of, in my view, this very ill-advised policy. So I'd like to say, sir, I fully agree with you on that particular point of view. And I again want to repeat, I don't believe NATO or weapons or guns are the answer. It's got to be through education, through culture.